the Partnering Against Corruption initiatives. This is a World Economic Forum initiative, whereupon Eskom was part of the organizations that implemented the principles against bribery. In an event, Chair, that we are unable to manage our corruption risk, Eskom is fully aware that there is a major risk of the reputational damage. We necessarily cannot afford to be in that particular space. We also cannot afford a situation to lose the brand value. Hence, then, therefore, in our engagement, as we plea with the committee today, it's a situation that we do our level best to manage the fraud exposure that we are having, but taking into consideration that those key 6 pillars are at the center of the organization in our fraud management. The question, Chair, that one might ask is corruption unique? Is it something that is only happening within a particular institution? Is it a situation that is happening only in a private or in a public institution? Is it a situation that is only happening in South Africa as a country, or is it a global issue? Having said that, we are fully aware that the motives of the fraudsters are changing all the time. We therefore have to ensure that our methodologies are at all stages equal to the activities that we are involved to and exposed to from the fraud perspective. Chair, I want to take you through the 4 pillars that we have as an organization. What exactly do we do within our prevention? There is a familiar concept that we all heard about that is on the lifestyle audits. I think there are very few organizations and institutions that I know of that have taken stances and steps as Eskom has taken. Chair, truth be told, it's not that easy to give an instruction to your executives to avail their personal information so as to their spouse's information on the matters that the organization wants to do proactively without any allegations that have been leveled against individuals. Secondly, I do not know of any institution that has taken action against its own employees for failing to adhere to a request by the organization to avail its information for the purposes of a lifestyle audit. Chair, what I'm saying and what I'm referring to is Eskom acknowledges its exposure and therefore acknowledges the fact that it needs to ensure that the leaders are playing the role and they are leading. And these activities that have been taken by the organization, we conduct the surprise audits, we conduct the fraud risk assessment. We are fully aware as to where are we exposed the most, and we are then therefore able to put the mitigation factors into those particular areas. We conduct the due diligence against our service providers. This is the concept that the banks knows as know your client. Of course, Chair, you might not know everything else when the person happens to hide. Hence, in an event that we happen to find that some of the service providers that you are dealing with are highly unethical, we've got a process in place that deals with unethical behavior of our service providers. These also include the blacklisting of the service providers that have been identified, as it has been communicated before. Within our detection mechanism, we've got a number of whistleblowing mechanisms over and above just the toll-free line. One of those particular mechanisms, from the appointment of our current group chief executive, he has devised a line where the employees are reporting directly to the chief executive. Upon the appointment of our COO, the people also reports directly into his office on the activities that is related to any maladministration. In the engagement by EXCO to the employees are encouraged also to report all the known incidents of any maladministration over and above just reporting to the toll-free line. And also employees are encouraged to provide some ideas that can assist the organization to enhance its effectiveness in line with its controls. Chair, I've indicated before that the response or the investigation is the third pillar upon which we rely on. We need to ensure that prior to incidents happening, it might be very late by the time we come and investigate. Therefore, we need to ensure that we first understand our risk exposure, we put the mitigation aspects, we investigate in an event that we are exposed at a later stage. But we have had the concept of consequence management. I think that's a buzzword in Eskom these days. Eskom is able to take consequence management against its employees because there is a groundwork, there is a process.
Sister Becker, I'm going to give you 5 more minutes to wrap up your presentation, and I was hoping that Eskom will include slides that will give us feedback on the investigations that were conducted previously and the details that were provided during the hearings on the RCA application, so that we know where we are, what has happened, as opposed to taking more time on the processes themselves. We are more interested also, not only on the measures, but what has happened and what has been recovered following those investigations.
Yes, Chair. Chair, let me then therefore probably come to my conclusion. I think we'll take the questions later on.
Okay, then in the meantime, you will be able to collate information with regards to the investigations that were conducted by Eskom, as they've indicated to the energy regulator, to give us feedback as to what happened since then.
Yes, Chair. We
Thank you. Thank you.
Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Naba. All right, Mr. Kassim, you want to wrap up, or is that all? All right, thank you very much. We still have a few minutes before tea break, so we're going to take questions from the members of the panel from NERSA. I'm going to start on my left-hand side with Mr. Sibanda to get questions of clarity. Please take down all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Eskom, for the 2 presentations. Chair, if I probably can start with the RCA application. So you did indicate that the regulator recently made decisions on the 3 applications last year, and now we are being requested to consider this application, which is the last of the MIPD 3. Now, you haven't given us an indication of how you want this application to be dealt with in terms of implementation, seeing that there are those 3 applications that we've recently dealt with. And this obviously will have a bearing in terms of what consumers can actually contend with. So I think we would appreciate Eskom making proposals in terms of how the regulator should be dealing with this particular application. Then secondly, Chairperson, I think we continue to contend with the issue of the disjuncture between the growth sales forecast and what materialized. And this is the biggest component of the RCA application once again. And we had a detailed discussion and debate the last time. But it's still not clear to me, Chair, as to how this should really be the consumers, or why it should fall on the consumer's lap. The miscalculations in terms of predictions for sales growth that have not materialized. And then, Chair, with respect to the various components that form part of the application, especially when you look at primary energy, so there are savings there that are due to the consumer. However, when you look at coal burn, for instance, the savings that have come about are really not as a result of Eskom's efficiencies. And in your presentation, you did indicate that these came about due to, for instance, lower production and lack of investment in certain coal mines and so forth, which indicates that had there been efficiencies, surely these savings could be much higher than what we are seeing now. So shouldn't the regulator be making further adjustments that are due to the consumer in that respect? Because these are not really arising out of Eskom's efficiencies. Chair, I think you've touched on the last issue around fraud and corruption, which is still an outstanding issue. And in our decision, we did indicate that we will be making adjustments as and when decisions are being made around these issues. But I think it will be important for us to get an indication of timing, what has since happened, any form of update on that in that respect, Chairperson. I'm not sure, should I go to the MIPD? Okay, all right. Thanks, Chair. If I can move to the MIPD. Now, again, the big issue remains the sales forecast. And Eskom, you are making growth projections that indicate an increase in sales. And in your explanation, you indicate that you undertake a particular process in terms of coming up with these predictions. For instance, you talk to your top 20 customers that account for 80% of your sales, and they indicate to you that this is what we plan to purchase from Eskom. But this is the same process that you undertook in the previous MIPD process. And we know that those predictions did not materialize. And you are making the same kind of prediction. And given what is also contained in the IRP 2018, which sort of like indicates growth in embedded generation, self-generation, and so forth, I don't seem to get a clear understanding that your predictions are actually taking into account all those factors and what has actually occurred in the immediate past in terms of loss of sales and so forth. So where are these predictions coming from? Seeing that the same process that you have undertaken now is the same process that you did the last time, and we know that that did not happen. So I just need some more understanding of the kind of forecast or predictions that you are coming with respect to sales. Yes, and obviously, I mean the debt situation is quite dire, but this tariff application is not a silver bullet, and it's not going to solve Eskom's challenges. So again, I think we need some more concrete steps or proposals in terms of what is it that Eskom is putting in place to arrest the situation, to turn around the situation, because this is just one part of the puzzle, and it's not going to assist you that much. Maybe if you can also assist me with respect to the process that you undertake in terms of putting units in cold reserve. Again, we have a situation where the system is constrained, and yet there are plants that are being put in cold reserve. So what is the process that you undertake, or what are the factors that you take into consideration before making that kind of a decision? And also, if you can align that with what is contained in the IRP 2018 in terms of decommissioning that is expected to come around from about 2021, which is not reflected in your application. Chair, I think I'll probably, I'll stop.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sibanda. Mr. Foley.
Thanks, Chair. I've got one question that relates both to the RCA and the MIPD in terms of the increases being requested. You know, in the last two sets of public hearings we had on tariff increases, RCAs, and the 1 year, we spoke a lot about the utility death spiral. And I think the one slide that you put up that shows your prices have gone up 500%, but debt's gone up 1,000%, or tenfold, as you put it, almost indicates that. Now, the increases you're asking for the RCA plus these MIPD increases, that pushes your price even further up. Are you saying to us that you've managed to arrest this trend? And how do you plan to do that if you're still going to continue on this path? The second part, or the second question, relates to the RCA, but also to the issue around corruption. I mean, the slides you've put up are really around your mantra and, you know, all the nice things you espouse. But specifically on the 11th of May, you presented a slide number 46. It was in Soweto when we were considering the RCAs for year 2 to 4. And you put up a slide with a number of areas and a number where you said you were still under investigation. And we would have liked to actually see what's come out of that. What is the culmination of that? What are the numbers that we're looking at that you've been able to identify? And then if I move to MIPD, I've got a question on, if I look at your slide 13 and 15, you seem to be saying, you know, you've got this 15% per year increase you're asking for. That still leaves you with a 50 billion rand shortfall. But if you had to apply for what would make you whole, which is slide 15, you're talking about a bigger increase, a medium type, and then a small one. My question is, what if you don't get, where's that 50 billion coming from? Is that something you're looking for from the shareholder, etc.? And if you don't get it, you've still got a 50 billion hole. Does that then come from debt again, which increases your debt servicing costs, and then you get into this other vicious cycle? Your slide number 25, I must say I don't agree with it. I mean, if you reduce your costs and you reduce the price, it leaves you space to increase or phase in your return faster, which means you could actually be earning a full return quicker at the same average price. And then your return will increase if you create the space by reducing your costs. And then the last thing, I think also Mr. Sibanda kind of spoke about it, was, you know, on your sales forecast, you made a comment about something about the low return, and you don't know of any business that would be able to function with a low return, etc. It's the same, it relates to the same slide I was talking about in the previous question. But I also don't know of any business that if you miss your sales target, you're just going to increase your price the next year and recover it from your customers. Because that, you see, because that speaks to my first question about the death spiral. Can you just give us a comment on that, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. Mkhize.
Thank you, Chairperson. And thanks to Eskom for the presentations. Maybe I'll just start off with the principal or overarching issues. I think the CEO of Eskom made it clear that the tariff is not the panacea to their challenges and sustainability. And therefore, I think it would be important to be very categorical and specific when it comes to the issues that they're dealing with government in terms of looking at the holistic picture to solve the problem. Because as my colleague has alluded to, if they don't get the assistance that they're looking at, then what? And also appreciate the fact that in terms of the prudence, you said that we are not looking at, we're not going to use like hindsight, but we do appreciate that we must be able to consider information that was available then or that should have been available, and not just say that we're looking at foresight, issues of hindsight, blindly. When it comes to the issues of fraud and corruption, I think that there must be a direct link to the initiatives and the outcomes of the investigation to this application, the two applications, in terms of what the impact is in reducing the associated cost. Because if you recall, I think even in the previous RSA application that we're dealing with, there was the issue of saying that when it's come to the procurement of coal, etc., there could be challenges there that or losses that have come about because of fraud and corruption, and then how that impacts. And our RCA approval was also subject to those investigations. Noting also the increases, it will help to then say how do we then factor this in terms of phasing it in, just to propose, as has been alluded to. There are also issues that you have raised. I'll go to the issue of the RCA when it comes to, like, I've seen that there is also the Majuba silo problem, for example, to say that problems that should have been resolved in prior years shouldn't then be addressed again or be dealt with in the RCA. Right. The issues of the total the revenue from our side is that I just would like to understand, because that revenue is informed by the sales, and the sales, they come lower than what was forecasted. And in the RCA, sorry, in the MIPD4, I'm not so sure whether you are going down to those figures using a lower base instead of the higher base in estimating revenue going forward. And you talked of the assumptions. The assumptions that are in the IRP, those assumptions, they've, as you have alluded, they've since changed. And then when then do you foresee that you are going to be able to update? Because it would be good to update prior to us finishing this process of public hearings, so that we can then have the most recent figures. Because I'm saying this, if you look at your MIPD for application, in terms of the plans that are going to be decommissioned vis-a-vis what you have, they are not necessarily aligned to what is in the IRP. So if you can just help with that. And then the challenge that I'm having is that when it comes to also the MIPD4, is to be able to look at this whole issue of the debt spiral, because the debt spiral must be arrested. Because when you're talking of the reduced volumes, you are also referred to the issue of the increase in the price of electricity. Although you don't indicate specifically the percentages, the question is how much then of the price is actually contributing to that reduction, as it's been seen that the elasticity is actually higher than what you tended to assume. So that issue of arresting the debt spiral must be addressed. And then when it comes to the primary energy cost, I've seen that the fuel prices, when it comes to the OCGTs, I would just like to confirm if they are based on in terms of how they compare with the BFP figures for the diesel. And then also when it comes to your figures that you put forth, you put forth the figures that, like, say, for example, if you look at the issues of the use of sorbents, etc., you put what was used, and then there's nothing in terms of what it was supposed to be, what was supposed to have been used. because that is also an issue, because we're looking at the matters of efficiency. I think the same that when it comes to the issues of prudence with regards to call handling from our side. Yes, you also talked, I think, the issue of the stakeholder, the significant stakeholder support that you require. If you can just also allude, I think it will help to put us in the picture in terms of that, so that there is a realignment of this. And then you're talking of the energy availability factor in your MIPD4 application. We've seen that going down, hence the recent load shedding that we have faced as a country. But you seem to assume that it's going to be better. The basis is not clear as to why then it should be better now. So if you can be able to help in terms of clarifying that. And then, okay, I'll come on the second round, the rest. Thank you.
Mr. Modise.
What do I press? This one. Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just thank Eskom for the presentation. I think it's a pity that we only have, 9 minutes before the break. So Eskom took most of the time with the presentation, but I guess that's important. We probably won't be able to deal with all the questions that I have today, but we'll probably do it as we go through other public hearings. But we will perhaps just respond to some of the presentations that were done. And maybe starting with the CEO. I think it was a little heartwarming to hear that there was an apology thrown somewhere in there. But I do have one of areas that I just want to understand, CEO. And one is it's a general question. We've made, as NERSA, decisions over the last couple of years. I know in our presentation we keep referring to the 5.3% tariff decision, the 2.3% tariff decision, and almost saying that it creates a low base requiring this tariff to increase. What I just don't understand is why is it that Eskom is unable to get the messages that are contained in those decisions, as opposed to just saying, oh no, you gave us that 5% was too low, and therefore, it was going to be 29%, we're doing a favor, it's now 15%. Why is it that Eskom still refuses to accept the reasons for the decisions? I know one of them you've challenged in court, and we will see what the outcome of that is. But somehow there seems to be this expectation that, NERSA made a 5% tariff increase, it justifies a 15%. And but I think that's the first question that I need to understand from your side. And the second, the next question, which I got from the messages you gave, Mr. Hadebe, is this issue of debt. I think in your message, you indicated that you decried the fact that your debt levels are increasing. It's going to be 419 billion by the end of this financial year. It could go up to 600 billion during the tariff period, and and just as a few things that I just like to understand. particularly from the leadership of Eskom. The first issue that I need to understand, and by the way, if the figure that's been bandied around was that our debt to equity ratio is about 70. You said 70 to 73. I think you said 72%, Mr. Kasim. Gearing, yeah. So gearing is 72%. And you'll note that in the tariff application, the 72% is not too far out from the 70-30 that you use as a target debt to equity ratio. So the 72%, and you look at the tariff application, you operate on the basis that your target is 70 to 30. So in reality, you really don't have a problem with the 70% debt level, debt to equity level. Yet you go and decry the fact that you have high debt. Now, there's just a few questions that I just want to understand in the manner in which we operate the Eskom business. The first issue is what you think the appropriate capital structure of Eskom should be. But the second issue is the decisions of Eskom management in relation to the management of the debt. And how do you, as Eskom management, manage a business or environment where there's suddenly high capital expenditure, where there's suddenly high growth, especially on the capital side. And let me just perhaps put a little bit more clarity on this. In the nature of the Eskom business is such that you are a capital-intensive business. So everybody accepts your capital-intensive business. I mean, to put up a power plant is expensive. Under normal circumstances, a private sector organization would go and fund some of those capital expenditures from both equity and debt, not rely on debt alone. And so there would be some sort of shareholder contribution. Now, why is it that South African public should bear the brunt of the lack of shareholder equity injection just because you're a state-owned entity? Now, ask him to recall, I know there were years, many years ago when I used to be at Eskom, when I think during the capital expansion program in the early 80s and this sort of thing, there was a cash injection from the state. Why is it that you're expecting the South African public to pay for that? But the second element relating to this is, your maturity profile. There's certain decisions that are taken by management, which we are presenting almost as, in my mind, scare tactics to the South African public. And I know, Mr. Kasim, in your presentation, and we will go through your presentation, you indicated that this year your cash flow statement indicated 45 billion in debt repayment, and you indicated some 20-something odd billion was bridging facility. Surely there is no way you run a capital-intensive long-term business with short-term debt. So what I'm saying is, how do you run a business where your power plants are in existence for 20 years, 50 years, with money that is just bridging facilities that has to be repaid within a year or 2 years and that sort of thing? Why is it the fact that you don't manage the maturity profile of your debt? How is it that it should be borne by the South African public? And how do we go and, as a regulator, make adjustment for the fact that management is making specific decision on putting short-term debt to fund long-term obligations. And suddenly they indicate that they are highly indebted and there's huge repayments, and suddenly they need South African public, the tariffs to go up. So that's the next thing that I just want to understand, to say, how do we adjust for that management decisions? But, the next thing is, maybe can you share with us this shareholder engagement? You did indicate, CEO, that you're having engagement with the shareholder, and the shareholder is looking at, you just mentioned a panel that the president has set up. But I'm more interested in what are you asking in relation to what you think the appropriate capital structure of Eskom should be. But there's certain information that you present that I actually think is misleading. I know, CEO, you indicated that at 6.3 cents per kilowatt hour, Eskom is still the cheapest generator of electricity in the world. I know you're shaking your head, but did you mention something like the electricity at 6.3 cents per kilowatt hour? It's, that's the notes that I wrote here. It's still one of the cheapest electricities globally. I have difficulty with that, and let me just tell you, perhaps you can explain to me how this works. Obviously, the first thing is South Africans are not feeling this. So Eskom says you're cheap, your electricity is cheap, South Africans are clearly not feeling it. But there's certain calculations that don't make sense. I mean, for instance, the impact of the exchange rate. If you take as an example, let's say your tariff was 100 cents per kilowatt hour. Use that as an example. And you operated in an environment which we did operate in, where the exchange rate was 6 rands to the dollar. I just did my quick calculations here. You probably get to 16 cents, 16 US dollars, 16.7 US dollars per kilowatt hour. But now we're operating in an environment where the exchange rate is 14 rands. That alone halves the dollar cents per kilowatt hour to 7.14 cents. Now, if you go and do a calculation today and say, oh, no, we operate in an environment where Eskom electricity is the cheapest, you're one of the cheapest in the world, and you don't take into account the deterioration in exchange rate. Some of it is so caused by some of the work that we've done. The fact that industry is not investing, cash is leaving the economy, and the impact of the decisions that you're making. Do you not get a feeling that you are giving misleading information? Is Eskom power truly the cheapest power? My suggestion is, why don't you do it at constant, perhaps dollar exchange rate, maybe that applied, say 2007 or 2008, so that you take out the impact of some of those calculations. So, just CEO, I know that's, you were shaking your head, but that's one of the questions that you did mention, that electricity is still the cheapest. And maybe get into the RCA.
Maybe the CEO should not shake his head, so that you don't have to respond to that, and then you will be given the opportunity if you do not agree with the statement made by Mr. Modise. If we can avoid those gestures, please. Thank you.
Okay. And most of with the RCA, I know Eskom had asked for some 66 odd billion, and we gave 32 billion tariff. And in your RCA, you do indicate that at the time that you made the application, you did not have sort of a reason for decisions. So my question would be, would your calculations be different if you had seen a reason for decision? And I know at the time we asked a whole lot of questions. You know, some of them I don't believe we need to repeat them now. For instance, you know, the big driver has been changes in your revenue, the overestimation of revenue. We asked questions during the previous round about why you didn't do your reopener at the time when your assumptions changed as they did. And there's a lot of other questions that we have asked. So I probably won't spend too much time on that, because the same questions will pertain. And in fact, the similar analysis as we did for the three RCA applications would also be applicable at this point in time. But maybe if you go to the MIPD 4, and again, we probably won't be able to go through all the detail, the questions that I just need to ask. Do you want to do a second round?
No.
Yeah.
Please go ahead with the MIPD 4, and then we get the responses. We'll do the second round, as I also do have questions and guidance.
Yeah. And maybe for now, I mean, we can go through some of the slides that you had. It might just be useful. I don't know if anybody will be able to change some of the slides, because I had questions on each one of the slides. So maybe starting with slide 10. Sorry, these slides were also emailed to us. Just want to make sure that I'm opening the right presentation. Okay, maybe starting with slide 10. That one is probably a simple question just on the assumptions. Because you indicate that the assumptions were finalized 18 months ago. I think it would be useful for Eskom to give an indication of what the impact of this, what the numbers would be. Were you able to go and make an adjustment? So what would change? Would your application be lower or higher, given that we're closer to the decision-making point? We know that the our MIPD rules allow us to make changes. So perhaps if you can also assist with regards to that. And then on slide 12, I think it is slide 12. You know, the biggest element in this your application for MIPD4 is this regulatory asset base. It's going up to 1.26 trillion rands. 1.26 trillion rands. Now, if you look at your published financial statements for 2018, I think it was sitting at, if I recall, around 700, just under 800 billion. The work done by your advisors, you said Young has done some work, also came to figures of around 800 billion. But suddenly, your regulatory asset base goes up, to 1.3 trillion rands. I mean, that's shocking. For me, there's a few things that I just need for you to just clarify with us. Do you think there's a flaw, a mistake in the electricity pricing policy that allows Eskom to go and revalue on a modern equivalent basis your plant on that basis? And let me ask the question this way. The manner in which you do this valuation, you assume that you're going to maintain your entire coal fleet and replace them for, well, almost for, let's just say, forever. You're going to replace the existing Majuba with another Majuba, Henrina with another Henrina, and this sort of thing. There's an assumption that is made here. And we're moving into a world where the energy mix is changing, where there's more renewables. There are more, distributed networks and all those technology is moving on. How is it that Eskom should be given a tariff-based or revaluation of an asset on the basis that you are replacing a Henrina with another Henrina, and you go and calculate this Henrina at today's cost? You call it modern equivalent basis, and then you come up with a figure of 1.2 trillion. What is the likelihood that you are actually going to replace all your coal power plants with another coal power plant? How is it that this does not align itself with government's plans in the IRP 2018? Because the expectations are that you're not going to be replacing Henrina with another Henrina and things like that. So that's the first issue that I have. How is it that your valuation model does not take into account the changing energy mix, changing technology in the world and in South Africa, including in the integrated resource plan? And then it allows you to go and say, if I were to replace my plants, it's going to be 1.3 trillion. That's the first thing that I want to do. But what I also want to do is just do a reconciliation on the work done by your advisors, which was they come up with 800 billion, and then you're coming up with 1.3 trillion, 1.263. Let's just call it 1.3 trillion. But suddenly this return on assets, it seems that you've done a sacrifice. In fact, the word you use is, you know what, we're going to sacrifice our return on asset. Now, your starting point is huge. Huge. I mean, this is, to be quite honest, I also did some calculations, back of the envelope calculations as we were talking here, that, some of the 1.3 trillion is, I think your at cost, in your balance sheet, these assets can't be more than 500 million rands. This is a huge multiple. So suddenly the return on asset is a sacrifice. So the question that I want to understand is, how did you do the sacrifice? Was it a thumbsuck? How do we balance it out? Was it science involved in doing that 16 billion returns that you are showing there? And was there any science in it? Or were you doing just a balancing act? And at some point, we'll probably have to engage a little bit more on how you calculated your weighted average cost of capital, and with an element of return on equity. But for now, somehow we're going to need to spend a little bit more time on this regulatory asset base just to understand how it gets to be, as high as this. And maybe some of the other questions I'll ask later. But maybe for just so that we can progress just for this first round of questions, maybe jump to slide 19. I'll ask some of my questions, Madam Chair, quickly. What did I have here? I think just one thing to note is that you do mention a number of things there. that the electricity pricing policy said our tariff should be cost reflective. But remember, cost reflectivity assumes an efficient operator, and that would be, your third bullet point there. But one thing that I just wanted to ask, for you to just indicate to us, is, how do you believe that in the manner in which you're running your plant, you're being efficient? And we'll probably go, again, in a little bit more detail in terms of your coal procurement, the level of short-term versus short-term, which you didn't cover, some of the plant that are supposed to be, on coal reserve. I know in this application you're talking putting some plants in coal reserves. But in some of the engagements that we've had, there's been indications that as much as 1,100 megawatts has actually been not put in coal reserves, shut down. So maybe if you give us an indication of some of those Eskom decisions and how they would impact on this. But we'll come to this again. RP, on this slide 20, the manner in which you present this price path, it's as if this information that was the information of NERSA. You do recognize that, or perhaps we do, this is the RP 2018, is a document of the Department of Energy. And yes, we do have an indication, but perhaps let me ask this as a question. This rapid tariff migration, did you get an indication that it was NERSA who said tariffs are going to be increasing this rapidly or not? Did you get a sense that it was the energy regulator's input that is incorporated in this huge tariff adjustment that you say is assumed in this one here? I had questions on the returns forgone, but we'll talk about it again. Maybe the government's support package on slide 22. Again, I just want to ask a question on, is this slide 22? You mentioned 102 cents per kilowatt hour. And government support package anticipated 102 cents per kilowatt hour. But our NERSA decision was 89 cents. That 102 cents per kilowatt hour, where did you get it from? Was it not just Eskom's own engagement and projections and that sort of thing? Why should the South African public, or especially the fact that the decisions of Eskom do not seem to be filtered through when these prices are adjusted? There's always an assumption that NERSA's decision either was incorrect or inappropriate, and therefore, when you engage with government, you're going to use 102 cents. Why is it that when you do those engagements, you don't use the tariffs that we, as NERSA, either have given indications would pertain at the time, or those that we have decided on? So that's the question that I had on that one. And again, page 20, slide 23. By the way, the debt and interest, we'll go into this debt in a little bit more detail, because there's other element that we spoke about maturity profile and all those sort of stuff. And I promise you that 96 billion that you're saying maybe the debt and interest repayments, you could actually reduce it by just extending the length of the debt. The example I gave you was that if you've got a facility which is a few months, 1 year or 2 months facility, or you call it a bridging loan, that affects, say, that 96 billion. Just by doing a simple changing the maturity profile of your debt, make your debt in line with the nature of your assets, say 20, 30 years, which other infrastructure companies do, you suddenly reduce that 96 billion to something that is affordable. And that's the sort of engagement that I think we just are going to have a little bit more. And then slide 25, we spoke about the returns, but we'll talk more about it. And just on slide 26, because you speak about the auditors and rating agencies. I'm just hoping that your auditors are just not saying that all the solutions comes from the tariff or the South African public, the tariff that has to be paid by the South African public. That in reality, they have regard to decisions and actions that are taken by management. In making sure that they manage the balance sheet, your affairs better. And I think it's something that we must just look at. And maybe just one quick question to Ms. Ndaba. I don't know, one question was asked, and perhaps the part of it will relate to the RCA. Last year you had 19 billion in irregular expenditure, and then there were also about fruitless and wasteful expenditure of 143 million. What adjustments have you done? Firstly, with regards to the fruitless and wasteful expenditure in your RCA, and do you think we should be making adjustments arising out of any amounts that you've either recovered or action you've taken, even on some of the irregular expenditure? And I know some of my colleagues asked questions relating to this. If you give us details of what has been recovered and stuff. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you very much. I think we will now take a break, and then when we come back, we'll allow Eskom to respond to all the questions, and we will have a second round of questions. And I hope that you will then structure your responses and have your team members to answer specific questions. We will also have questions around the production plan. So if you can also make sure that we have people that will give us specific responses to those. Maintenance issues and the additional funds that you indicated in your presentation that will be required for maintenance plan. Issues pertaining to the energy availability factor. That is also part of the production plan. So we would like your team to speak on those specific assumptions that have been made, how realistic those assumptions are, given the era that we have entered of load shedding, low coal stock, and some of the supply side constraints that are facing Eskom, and how realistic are these targets that you want to put in the MIPD 4 for you to want NERSA to consider in this application. So if you could try and have your team ready to provide clarity after the break. Thank you very much. The break is only going to be 15 minutes, and you will be notified, and will start right away as soon as we enter the room.
Neem één haal, twee halves, twee jongens. Neem alsjeblieft, je bent echt
Okay, please take your seats so that we can resume the hearing. Please take your seats. Right. All right, we are resuming our public hearing, and we would like to request the Eskom to come forward and respond to the questions put forward by the members.
Chair, my CEO will first start on his questions, and I'll deal with the other questions. Thank you, Caleb. I think there's quite a long list of questions that have to be answered. I will answer the key strategic ones. Then my colleagues will come and respond to the rest of the questions. I think the first issue that I would like to touch on is whether we are misleading South Africans. That is the key issue. And as I'm standing in front of you here, I want to state it categorically that we are not misleading you. We are telling you the facts. We are telling you the problem that we are facing. We are telling you the challenges that we are facing and what ought to be done and what we are trying to do. It doesn't pay us dividends to stand in front of you and lie. It wouldn't at all. When we say we are apologizing to South Africans, we mean it. Because we really feel that South Africans deserve better than what has happened. Irrespective of whether these problems happened 10 years back or 1 year here, we are facing the issues. The truth of the matter is we first have to open up and agree to South Africans that we messed up and that we have the system to turn the place around. And that's what we're saying here. We are saying this institution will be turned around. But the tariffs is not the silver bullet. If we get the tariffs and we continue running the business the way we were running it, we are going to be in trouble. The tariff only increases the earnings. It allows Eskom to service its debt, but it only allows that. Let me give you the numbers. Maybe we'll understand what we're talking about. We are talking about an institution that has total revenue, roughly, I'm rounding off, because the CFO provided the numbers. We're talking about the entity that has generated total revenue of roughly about 180 billion. This institution has total cost of roughly about 140 billion. That leaves you with 40 billion rands. However, servicing debt and paying that debt this year demands 50 billion. So you have 10 billion that you are borrowing to deal with debt. So we are in financial problems, and will continue to be like that. So when we say we are requesting a review or we are requesting an increase of 15% in tariffs, we are not saying this is a silver bullet that will help us. In fact, what it does, it just allows us to come closer to servicing the debt, but it doesn't allow us to service the total debt just on that. It's a combination of things that we are putting on the table. And that's what we are trying to do here. We said, as Eskom, we have a responsibility to deal with the cost issues. And that is what we have explained. We said we are looking at the CAPEX, we are looking at the OPEX, over and above that we have identified another initiatives that will save us an additional 33 billion. We might not be able to meet exactly that target because we are facing current challenges like maintenance and CAPEX. But we are working on that. And we went to the South Africans and we said, South Africans, the shareholder has a role to play here. Because these two things that I've highlighted, whether we increase the tariff by 15%, and whether we cut the cost by a bigger margin, are not going to solve Eskom's problems. Eskom's problems are about the balance sheet. That's a third element. And unless we deal with that balance sheet, we're able to optimize the balance sheet. That is, we're standing on the balance sheet that we're capable to go out in the market and borrow. We are not going to be able to borrow the money. We are facing challenges as we are talking right now, where the government guarantee is not sufficient to allow us to go to the market and borrow. And the investors are demanding ever more. While we have raised 52 billion of the 72 billion this year, we have an additional 15 billion that has to be borrowed. And our balance sheet doesn't allow that. So the issues, when they start talking about the capital structure, they ignore the fact that the financial situation, environment, the balance sheet of Eskom does not allow Eskom to go out and cherry pick and choose. We want a 15-year bond, we want a 20-year bond. The only long-term bond we're getting from Eskom is from the global financial development financial institutions like the World Bank and related institutions. That is government to government. Over and above our guarantee, when we go to the market and we say we want to borrow money, it is not out of our choice to get a one-year loan. But we rather have that because the balance sheet doesn't allow creditors to say we're willing to give a 2-year, we're willing to give a 3-year. Just now, we're struggling with the 1 year in the financial markets. With the 6 months. That has increased to about a year. So if we do all these things, we continuously improve on the cost, we show that we, as management of Eskom, were committed in ensuring that we take painful decisions on the one side. Then the regulator understand the challenges that we are facing. As an independent regulator, they have to make a call. 3, the shareholder understand the dynamics that this institution, which is Eskom, is on a debt cliff. If we don't get any guarantee, if government doesn't come and talk to us, by next year, we're not going to be able to access the market, that is financial market. And if we are not able to access the financial market, this becomes something of the past. That is the truth. That is the story we are facing. Those are the numbers that the CFO provided. It's painful, I know, but it's the fact. It is the truth. The second issue is whether we are one of the cheapest energy producers in the world. Let me qualify. In the past 10 years, you have reasons. In fact, 12, 15, the increase has been exponential. But we still remain. And when we talk about that, it's not us who are saying that. It came from the World Bank. They said you still remain the cheapest. And that was 2016. But in the past 2 years, in 2017, we had a 2.2 increase, and this year we have a 5.23. Roughly, in the past 2 years, we have 3.5%. It won't change the status quo. But it does affect you on the bottom line. We're not hiding that. So, if the World Bank says that, and also the independent companies or firms that are doing global research, such as BCG, which is the Boston Research Group, such as Lazard, have stated that. But that doesn't justify the decision we're making. So we're not coming here and saying, you should enjoy the cheaper electricity price, don't complain. We are aware of the circumstances that we have gone through. We are aware, which is a question that was asked, that probably when we had Medupe and Kusile and Irregular, and we spent 300 billion from the balance sheet of Eskom, maybe it should have been done a bit differently. because it has wiped out the balance sheet of the institution. They're talking about the institution 10 years back that had a debt of 40 billion. Now it has 419 billion. But these are dynamics that we are facing as we are talking now. We need to move forward. We can deal about who did what was supposed to do, all the corruption, but we have to move forth. South Africa needs electricity. And if growth was 5-6% or so, the situation would have been worse. Again, that's the truth.
Mr. Hadebe, in the interest of time and to have about 15 other stakeholder presenters today, I will ask all the presenters, including the members of the panel, to go straight to the point in responding to the questions so that we can manage the time.
Yes, Chair, I was answering the question.
Yes, thank you very much. No, I appreciate the response. Thank you.
Chairperson, thank you for all the questions. I think the first one with regard to fraud, the investigations and detail, we will provide it to you during the course of these public hearings around what we committed to at the last 1 year and the RCA application. We don't have that detail with us today. Maybe let me deal with some of the other bigger issues, maybe the easier responses. To Mr. Modise on the DOE slide and the price of electricity, I believe I was clear that said that's the DOE and that's their calculations. I never said it was the NERSA reference to where tariffs should be. That's their calculations of electricity prices based on the draft IRP that they have released for 2018. With regard to the 13% and the shareholder support and the assumptions taking into account the NERSA decisions, at the point in time when that decision was made with government, yes, whatever the respective regulatory decisions was, there was an assumption on future electricity prices, and to balance the equation from a financial analysis, that is the assumptions that were made to allow for a 23 billion rand equity injection, which subsequently happened. Yes, I do agree that process did not entail discussions with the regulator. It was government entities that were discussing that equity injection. If I move on in terms of the maturity of debt and matching long-term debt to long-term assets, I think my CE has touched on it. It's all about, yes, currently in our profile of debt, it averages about 7.5 billion. The DFIs give us about an average 15 billion rand worth of terms and conditions. Obviously, based on our current credit profile and our ratings, as my CE has said, it's very difficult to get longer-term money based on our credit matrix at the moment, and more importantly, clarity and certainty not only on tariffs, but policies around this industry and how it will impact on Eskom in the future. So those factors need to be taken into account to try to match more longer-term debt to match the assets. This is what lenders are willing to put on the table based on the numbers they're seeing in front of them and some of the unknowns that we currently have on the table. With regard to the EAF and the sales, and yes, the point of highlighting that the application was done 18 months ago, and the members are correct that a lot has changed, in particular around generation performance. The EAF has deteriorated. We will then deal with the coal reserve issue, and chairperson and to the panel, we're busy with that work, and we will also present that detail during the course of these hearings, definitely before we conclude. And we'll go into much more detail at Port Elizabeth hearings around the generation performance in particular. Chairperson, I think the other big point that was touched on was in terms of the RAB and the modern equivalent, and is it used to replace the existing? I think we must acknowledge that our application is done in terms of the methodology. which requires a modern equivalent valuation, which we have done. In terms of the detailed recon between the 800 billion and the 1.4, we will present that during the course of these hearings. But I think one point just to make the audience aware, that is not a 29, the 1.4 is what the value of the assets will be in the date when it's implemented. The 800 billion, which was done by the consultants, was a 2016 number, so you need to then bring that forward to the equivalent year. And also we take into account the additional capex that will be spent during the course of the period up until the respective application years. But we'll do a detailed recon as requested by Mr. Bodise. I think with regard to the sacrifice, again, once you have the value, you get the depreciation amount in terms of the methodology. And we were looking from a revenue requirement perspective, as I said, you either ask for the 29% or you try to balance the impact on the consumers. For the equation to balance, then the return on assets that we ask for in the application then becomes your balancing number based on the assumptions you made around the asset base. With regard to the point of is price just the only issue, I think in my presentation I conclude that all three elements need to be looked at, Chairperson. Maybe lastly, I think a question around the RCA, now that the decision is out, will Eskom change its request for the 21.6 billion? We will, during the course, respond to the regulator on that. And I think it was Mr. Mkhize also to put on the table what do we see in terms of the implementation and liquidation. Like we've concluded in the previous public hearings, when we get to the end, we'll make a recommendation to the regulator. Chairperson, I didn't go line by line, but I wanted to touch on the big items and the themes that were asked of Eskom. Thank you.
No, they're done. Okay, let me just summarize because I see my members here, they are quite a bit confused with regards to I think the sufficiency of the responses. Let me just summarize issues that Eskom is supposed to provide further details on. The first one is the RAB, the RAB, and all the questions that were asked in relation to the RAB. And in relation to the RAB, you need to also touch on the other units that are not usable currently and will not be in use for the next, for 12 months or so. And others, for instance, in Rina 3, Duva 3, what is happening there? What kind of adjustments are you going to make on the RAB with regards to those? So that's the first one. And then the second area that you need to focus on, there's a number of questions, is the production plan. How realistic the plan is. And related to the plan is the EAF, right? Because you estimated 78% of EAF. However, given the deterioration that you are talking about, the load shedding, the issues of a shortage of coal stock and all those, and also just the performance of the plants is an issue. And currently, you advised NERSA that you are sitting at around 73% or so, but you are not providing details as to how are you going to then improve this 73% to justify the 78% that you have applied for. So we need details on that. Yes. So you need to deal with all of those under the production plan. I think the production plan will require extensive revision on its own because now we can't work on some of the aspects that are contained in there. And then the other issue that you need to focus on is the issue of the increasing debt. what are the causes of that, and what caused that, and some of the measures that you put in place which will reduce burden on consumers. Yes. The fourth thing, and this relates to the remark made by the CEO, who stated that Eskom has given due consideration to the impact of the double-digit increase that Eskom has requested of 15%. However, the application that is before us does not have the details on the impact on consumers. There's no study that has been provided to us to see that impact. Also to appreciate whether indeed Eskom genuinely considered the impact of the 15%. Not only on consumers, but also on business. So can we get the details on that in line with the remark that was made by the CEO? That's the fourth thing. The fifth thing that is not dealt with in the application, they are particularly on the, let's talk about the RCA, on the revenue variance. You just touched coldly on the demand factors as well as the supply side factors. However, you did not deal with, for instance, if you talk about price sensitivity, and that also goes to the point made by Mr. Follet regarding Eskom missing the sales target. Because your price has gone up. If your price has gone up, the natural reaction from consumers will be to reduce consumption. So if they reduce consumption, it is because of it. So why do you still have to claim from consumers on something that you have not supplied or provided, or something that they did not enjoy? So what kind of adjustments based on price sensitivity? Okay, so we need to see adjustments that Eskom will make on price based on price sensitivity, but also adjustments based on supply side constraints faced in terms of the performance of the plant that did not achieve the 80% that was on the MIPD 3 decision. And you achieved less. I think you said you achieved 78% in 2017, 2018. Yes. So there was a set target, a performance target. You didn't meet the performance target. You achieved less. What adjustment? And how do you account for that? Because we need accountability. Those are some of the things that you need to respond to. The other issue that you need to talk about and get people to address is the maintenance. There's always an issue of the maintenance backlog. And you also touched on your presentation with regards to additional funding for maintenance. There is no accountability with regards to the previous money that was granted to Eskom on maintenance, and to show how maintenance was carried out by Eskom to account for that, so that we can understand why you need more money for maintenance and how maintenance is going to be done in the next 3 years. And not only that, NERSA has always been concerned with about the quality of maintenance and the scoping of that maintenance. So we need those specific aspects to be addressed extensively, and also to justify this increase that is required on maintenance as to how you're going to do it. And that should also be accompanied by aspects of that are included in your maintenance plan. Because if you need more money for maintenance, you need to account how you're going to use that money and how you're going to carry out the maintenance regime and the quality and scoping of that maintenance that needs to improve. Members, did I miss any other? Revenue impact of RP 2018. You will ask that. No. Additional questions?
Yeah, perhaps, as we delve a little deeper in each section, for instance, on the revenue, in your revenue forecast, can you perhaps have a look at the issue of the small-scale embedded generators, the 200 megawatt per annum that is assumed in RP 2018, how you've taken that into account. You may not, well, what I've read so far, there is no indication. What impact does it have during your planning cycle? But also the impact of other off-grid generators. And I know, and some of these, as I said, we when we look at the operating costs, we will go through elements of operating costs, including some of the taxes like the carbon tax. How do you think it's going to impact on you, assuming it does come into play, and what adjustment you would need to make on that? And yeah, some of these will bring as we go to other regions.
Okay. All right. So the other questions that were asked by members, which Eskom did not respond to, relates to the sales growth. You know, the growth in sales and the assumptions that are made with regards to that. So what we need in the next hearing is the detail on that, as to how did you base the assumptions on with regards to the forecast. Yes. And the evidence. When it comes to the cold reserves, we see that you have not included the cost associated with the plants that are put on cold storage. So we just want to understand what is the plan from Eskom on that. Okay. If you could come back to us on that. And then when it comes to the IPPs, we are concerned about this, the cost. I think there's a cost of about 253 million. It's actually the cost, it's both on the RCA as well as the MIPD 4. This is the cost related, or the charge related to the use of the system, transmission system. And we thought that those costs are already included upfront when through the connection cost of the IPP companies. So why is it that Eskom include these charges in the IPP bills? So we need clarity on that. Any questions?
Okay, sure. Sorry, the one question that I don't think you covered was around the application being a 50 billion rand shortfall in terms of the debt servicing. May I just add to that? And you can come back with the response to it. So in your follow-up now, you made a statement about lessening the impact on the customer. I think there's a question in there that says, well, you seem to have made that decision by applying for the 50 billion shortfall. Mm-hmm. Should that be Eskom's decision? Why is it Eskom's decision? And why does Eskom not apply for what it needs, which is your slide 15, and maybe then adjust that by whatever your shareholder decides to do, and then the regulator makes a decision on that? Why is it Eskom deciding up front that it is applying for an adjusted, essentially, revenue?
Comes to the OCGTs, the 6% CPI escalation on the cost of for diesel over the period of the MIPD4. Can you clarify the reason for that? And also the risk, given the deterioration of the plant performance, the risk of overutilization of the OCGTs. I think we see that coming if there's no improvement on the part of Eskom with regards to plant performance. So if you could also touch on that and the possibility of increasing the utilization of OCGTs. And I think all of that really talks to the to the assumptions that you have made currently in this application, how realistic those assumptions are. And we're a bit worried, it seems to us, given the situation currently at Eskom, that some of those assumptions are not going to materialize. So we need then some facts from Eskom to justify why do you put these targets that you say you're going to perform in accordance with these targets, and the information that you have in justifying those performance targets. I think that is the core issue here, if you can deal with some of those in the next hearing.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Yes. We do have additional questions. Some of them are coming from the members of the public, but the members of the team here, the panel members, will find a way of trying to get the substance of the key issues that are contained in those questions. Mr. Foley?
Thanks. And I don't know when you'll respond to it, but there is a concern. We often see a lot of streetlights on during the day, and we know a lot of that's municipal issues, etc. But the question is, where does that cost get catered for? And does it impact on Eskom? If it impacts on municipalities, it obviously talks to the municipal sustainability and debt recovery issue that you mentioned. And what are the things that can or are being done to solve those problems?
Okay, thank you. There's another question from Mr. Modise.
I think, as we go through some of the more detail, some of the elements relates to your operating costs and how efficient they are. It's one thing putting, the reduction or the increase or lower increase in percentage terms, but in reality, what we're looking for is some of those costs in relative terms, in terms that can benchmark against other entities. So you need to be looking at elements such as, by the way, in relation to all your operating costs, employee costs in terms of number of staff members per you can do it by megawatt per capacity or kilowatt hours produced. You can look at contractors, management costs. So this comes from a member of the public. So you're going to need to just do those sort of international benchmarks and just say your costs per kilowatt hour, how do they compare in relation to other utilities and stuff. But some of the things that we'll probably need to deal with when we look at costs, but also, it's things like primary energy. I know we will get an opportunity to go through it in detail. You've got a big assumption of sample code unknown. So, you're looking at your procurement of coal and you're saying these are from cost plus or long term and short term, and suddenly there's, just 18 under 20% each year of unknown. We think you should be closer to the planning period. How is it that you've got such a big element of unknown? And when we look at the regulatory asset base, we just will probably have to engage and say how you took into account this economic obsolescence. How you took into account, say, Goodberg. Why is this overnight cost? It's one thing just stating that overnight costs have just gone up. What we'd like to know is the reasons why, and the issue of useful lives. And then this return on assets versus return on capital. Because, we use a weighted average cost of capital, which has got a debt element and equity return. And I know we are applying it as an ROA, but perhaps let's talk about it, and then carbon tax I spoke about. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. I think those are some of the questions, and therefore you need to then revise your presentation and have members of your team presenting on each of the sections and provide the clarity that is required for both applications. And don't forget the implementation plan or implementation proposal requested by Mr. Sibanda for the RCA, in line with the consideration on the economic impact of these increases. Would like to then thank you very much. If you can take those notes, and then when you in the next hearing, please do your presentation, but also list all of these areas that were not responded to sufficiently.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Chairperson.
All right, thank you very much. We now move on to the next presenter, which is SALGA. We have the name of Mr. Nhlanhla Ngidi from SALGA to present. Mr. Ngidi, do you have any objection in taking the oath? No. All right. May you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you're going to provide before this panel today will be the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Please state your name and your designation at SALGA for the record.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nhlanhla Ngidi. I'm the head of electricity and energy in SALGA National Office.
All right, thank you. You may proceed with your presentation. You have, I don't know if I said 20 minutes earlier on. It looks like I'm cutting the cost and try to be efficient, but I can give you 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will try to save you time, because I think we've been here for a couple of years. I think the arguments are still going to be the same. We're still going to be emotional about the same things over and over. So I think on other issues in my presentation, I'm just going to just roll over. You will see that in my presentation mostly, there will be issues of clarity that we pose to Eskom as well, because we did have a consultation exercise with Eskom, and then we sent some few issues of clarity to Eskom which were not responded to. I understand Eskom was pressed with time and everything, so we're not saying that Eskom did not want to respond to those. But maybe those issues of clarity will be, matters that NERSA will be able to get response from the Eskom side, since SALGA didn't really get the response. And as I said, maybe it was the issue of time at Eskom, not because they didn't want to. Chairperson, I think I'm not going to stress on the introduction part, but we've been talking about this. I think Eskom also talked about it. There is a link between the economic growth and the electricity demand growth. I heard the CEO of Eskom talk about the pain that we have to go through. Maybe he's right. But now the problem is, I think, if we have to go through that pain of increasing tariffs and having very expensive tariffs, what kind of customers are we going to be left with in the grid? Because we are giving more and more opportunities for affluent customers to actually leave the grid. It's becoming more affordable for them. We are not really dangling a carrot to the customers that are paying to actually stay in the grid. And I think this is the risk that we are undergoing. We might give Eskom 15% plus whatever percentage on the RCAs, but is it really going to turn around things? Are we really going to get these sales that we are projecting? And my answer is no, because we are sitting in municipalities, we are having negative growth. There is an issue around government needing to revitalize the economy. If the economy is not revitalized by government, we're not going to make it. Municipalities are owing Eskom almost 20 billion. We are working with Eskom, and we've realized that it's a government problem. It's not just Eskom and municipalities. It's not entirely the problem of Eskom, but it is a problem. And, the reasons why, mostly, we might have those delinquent municipalities, maybe. But I think we all know the questions that municipalities are also going through what Eskom is going through. If Eskom is not having sales, Eskom wants to claim it on the RCA, but municipalities cannot do that. Obviously, we understand the frameworks are different, but obviously, the 40% that purchases that are done by municipalities to Eskom is due to the customers that must buy from municipalities. And if you don't get those purchases, obviously Eskom is not going to get the sales that is projected. And Eskom only can claim that on RCA. It's a little bit unfair. So I'm just going to roll through. I was just talking about the issues around what is happening and what the models that we need to look at in the industry. There is a change, there is a disruption, and increasing the prices is really going to be motivating the change and the disruption. It's not going to help. As I said, Chairperson, we're not dangling the carrot for the paying customers. Instead, we are motivating them to leave the grid, and the not paying customers, the low class, are the ones who are just staying in the grid, stealing electricity, not paying. As a result of that, municipalities are not going to recover enough to pay Eskom, and we're going to go through the same debt spiral. So we need to do things differently. We have, as SALGA, hosted a summit in 2018 where everyone agreed that the industry structure as it is no longer working out. Let's ask ourselves questions, very honest and painful questions. Do we still need the monopoly? Yes or no? I'm not going to answer that question. But these are things as government of South Africa that we need to answer. Do we still need a monopoly? Do we still need an EDI that is structured in the manner which is structured at this point in time? Because it's obvious it's not working. The municipalities are being owed over 140 billion. Eskom is being owed 20 billion. And where does the money going to come from if we keep on increasing the cost of this commodity? So we understand the predicament that Eskom is going through, but everyone is going through it. There are no holy cows, Chairperson. So in the RCA, I just have 2 slides that talk to the RCA, and I'm going to move to MIPD4. I'm not going to go through the decisions that have been made recently on the RCAs, but yes, they are here, and they are waiting for us. Once we have approval of the MIPD4, the RCA is going to be liquidated in parallel to the MIPD4. Obviously, customers understand this. If you don't understand this, if Eskom gets 15% on MIPD4, parallel to that, there's going to be a liquidation of RCA, which is around 4% plus. So we might have a case of 20 plus, 19, 20 plus % of electricity increase. Not considering the RCA that we're currently talking about now. So that one might be maybe after the MIPD4 and be liquidated parallel to MIPD5 if there's going to be a MIPD5, Chairperson. So we are really in a tough situation, and we really have to think. I agree with some of the questions that have come from the members around, why do we think maybe increasing these tariffs could be a silver bullet? And I think I'm happy I had the CEO also agreed that this is not a silver bullet. And it's really not. But we really have to think hard around how do we respond to these changes that we are going through in order for us not to get these customers that used to be our captive customers to still remain with us and give them a different and better service for them to be able to stay with us and still sustain the industry. But I think the race at which we are going is not really going there. What we are doing is we're saying we're not selling more, let's increase. And what does that mean? It means people are going to just look at other ways. Poor people go back to paraffin with the grid. And they are connected, but they go back to paraffin. What does that mean? It means this commodity is unaffordable anymore. But those who can afford it, maybe a lot of people here can afford it. They're thinking about solar. They're thinking about a lot of other, energy sources that they can use in order for them to supplement or to offset the increases of electricity. So just one slide talking to the RCA. I'm not going to go through that. It's it's in Eskom's document. But what I wanted to emphasize there, if you look at that, we all had the Eskom presentation this morning. This RCA is purely dominated by the sales. If you look at it, it's purely dominated by the sales. So what does this mean? It means that we must ask the customer to pay more for less purchases that happened. And SALGA and municipalities, unfortunately, are not for that. We do not support that. And we're saying there's too much burden hanging over South African customers with recent RCAs as well that I talked about. And also, we are saying if Eskom is going to be forecasting higher sales, even if they know from 2012 the sales have been declining, and then later come back again and say we sold less, and because this was allocated, we have a right to claim this from a customer. I think we know we're not going to crack it in the industry if we're going to keep on doing that. I think we need to do things differently. Let's look at the issue of sales forecast. Let's be realistic. We have a negative growth in municipality, and it's 40% of your purchases in Eskom. But Eskom, you are still projecting more sales. I'm not sure where is that going to come from. But I think Eskom maybe will still explain that. So in essence, Chairperson, this slide is just not supporting this RCA. We don't believe as SALGA, we don't want to be technical about it, it's an emotional position. We don't think that customers should be punished because there was no sales or there was not enough sales. That's basically it. That's it from our side on the RCA. And with your permission, Chairperson, can I move to MIPD 4? In terms of MIPD 4, I'm going to briefly talk about the consultation, which I did talk about in my introduction. On the 27th of July in 2018, we received a letter from Eskom. Obviously, Eskom is to comply to the MFMA Section 42 on the consultation around its application. And we also went through our own internal consultation. So whatever we say is not what SALGA says, it's what municipalities say. And we hosted Eskom and municipalities in September, where we all have these very robust deliberations with Eskom. They're always constructive. Eskom also gives us a lot of response around the issues we have or the questions we have, issues of clarity given also. And I think at the end of that workshop, we agreed with Eskom that we were going to send them our application, which we did. I must say, as Chairperson, that all was within the 40-day that is required by the MFMA. Most of our content of the document that we sent to Eskom was some issues or more issues of clarity, which hopefully NERSA will be able to ask Eskom, and Eskom will be able to respond to. As I said earlier when I was introducing my presentation, is that it might have been the issue of time from Eskom's side not to be able to respond. But I think also the regulator has the mandate over Eskom, where Eskom is actually forced, I'm lacking a better word, forced to respond to the questions that are actually asked by the regulator. So I'm going to talk about the customer centricity. And I did say, I think even with us, municipalities, if we're still going to increase tariffs with double digits at 15+%, we are not being customer-centric. We can call customer-centric all we want in our documents and applications, but that is not customer-centric. It means we are out of touch with the reality. And we know that the issue, we've talked about this, unemployment is still rising. And people who are employed and can afford are still living the grid. And this is what is happening in municipalities. And due to that, municipalities are unable to buy more from Eskom or even pay Eskom sometimes. So the commercial customers, I want to talk about that, especially with the disruption that is happening. And we see this happening a lot in the metros. A lot of these shopping malls are now moving off the grid, or even moving 80% of what they used to buy from municipalities, and they are moving towards other sources of energy. And soon we're going to have storage. In other countries, storage is even being used through PPA setups, where an entity will set up a storage and have a PPA with a commercial building of 10 or 15 years and then just supply them with electricity. So we're going to have that happening a lot, especially since we are expecting the prices of storage to go down very soon. So let's think about those things. You know, the change that is coming versus us wanting to try to increase tariffs to address the financial issues we have. Maybe it's justified that we have to increase electricity, but there's something we need to think hard about. Is the economy really allowing for this? I think that's the question that remained unanswered. But I did say that the government needs to revitalize the economy of South Africa so that there is soft landing against the ever increases of commodities and services. And right now, there's no soft landing. It's hard landing for customers. And also, Eskom refers to structural shifts in the country which would affect the sales volume. But we really didn't see that in the financial models of Eskom. Also, the document explicitly mentions initiatives to grow sales volume from customers. And I'm going to ask this question again: which customers are going to be buying more? Because the customers that we are targeting, the industries and the smelters, they're all in distress. And a bigger percentage of their input cost is electricity. So we must think about that as well. In terms of the sales volumes and projections, so in the previous year, 2018-19 revenue application, it showed that how sales volume rebasing was required. And this is when actual volumes were on a decline since 2012. And projections of Eskom are still indicating a positive growth. And also municipalities are experiencing negative growth, and this number is at 2%. And I did say that it represents 40% of your revenue, Eskom. And if 40% of your revenue is actually experiencing a negative growth, they think differently of how you actually want to implement these ever-increasing prices. Some of the issues of clarity that hopefully will be able to be answered by Eskom will be in Durban with Eskom as well. Hopefully they will take notes of this and maybe answer in their presentation or maybe in their responses. But there are some of the questions we asked in our document that given that the actual sales volume of 2017-18 declined, is Eskom not enthusiastic to project growth of almost 1% on local sales for year one as well as for year three? And also, what could be the basis of Eskom to forecast 8.4% growth in international sales in year one on the back of a forecasted decline of 2.4%? So maybe Eskom can explain what has happened with this jump of the forecast of 8.4% when there was a forecast of a decline of 2.4%. And also, what could be the basis of Eskom's forecast of 3.8% growth in international sales in the year three? And the basis of the increase of 17.67% in the selling price of SPAs in year two. And as I said, Chairperson, I don't think maybe I want to go through all these questions.
You have 3 minutes, Mr. Ngidi.
Yes, because we did ask those questions to Eskom, and hopefully with the presentations you have with you, you'll be able to get those, impose those questions to Eskom, and for Eskom to respond to those. And I think I'm going to skip the depreciation part of the application, but there were issues that we had around annual financial statements, which were talking different numbers, and the the application talking different numbers. So there we were saying there's no alignment and it's a bit confusing. And I'm going to move on primary energy as well. We picked up a couple of discrepancies from the application and the annual financial statement as well. And also there were issues around Eskom's own generation costs not increasing on year 2 and 3, but there was an expected increase this year as well. And I think we also talked about, we need to understand how Eskom is actually going to, or maybe Eskom and government is actually going to manage the issue around the contracting on the coal, and also to arrest the issue of prices of coal. Because obviously the industry or the market of coal as it is right now, it favors more the international players. And they are buying more of the coal, and Eskom obviously is left with the lower quality of the coal. And therefore, it's hard to even manage the issue of the contracts and, reducing the prices of the coal. Because I have less time, I'm just going to move very quick. There were questions we had around imports as well, where Eskom expects about 25% increase in year 1, but only 6% increase in in subsequent years. And also the output is dropping by 20%, but the Eskom is actually expecting the increase of around 25%. And around IPPs, I think this one I'm going to just swift through because we wanted to get clarity around the IPPs that are coming and their commercial operation and the effect of that in the application so that we don't pay for something that really is not there yet. There were questions also we had around operations and maintenance. I think the panel already, asked Eskom the questions that we wanted to ask. There were issues around the environmental levy as well. And we were asking Eskom why is the system average auxiliary is increasing over the years, and even why are the auxiliaries at 8%? Why just keep them at 5% or less? Cost containment, I think it's been talked about. I'm not going to stress on it, but I think we all agree that there still need to be more cost containment exercises that we have to go through as a country and not just Eskom. Going through to conclusion, I think we submit that in the current economic climax, the Eskom proposed tariff is way above the inflation. I know that Eskom has a particular argument around us making an argument on inflation. We understand that, but we still think it's way above the cost of living adjustments that are happening every year. So the cost of living is actually trailing behind, and the commodities are actually flying sky high. Also, we acknowledge the tariff rationalization that is being done by Eskom as part of the concessions that Eskom made with SALGA. And also, we acknowledge the increases that are going to take place in municipalities as a category of the Eskom customers. And also, we think there is a need maybe for NERSA to consider more performance-based regulation. We don't know how to craft that, but we think maybe we need to be more, vigilant to Eskom's performance vis-a-vis what Eskom asks from us as the public. And Eskom needs to be made accountable for that. And I think I will just jump to the last one, that we appreciate and sympathize with Eskom financial challenges. Everyone is going through this, and we entrust the regulator, as the regulator has done in the previous years, to do the right decision, and the decisions will be in line with the Electricity Regulation Act, which amongst others must look at affordability, the universal access, and also to allow the efficient utility to recover its costs with reasonable margins. And I actually bolded the efficient purposely. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ngidi, for the presentation and also for the outline of issues that you are requesting the regulator to get clarity on from Eskom. If you have a piece of paper and the pen, I will check if members have any questions of clarity from the presentation. Kabase.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Hlomuga, for the presentation. From my side, I think your presentation seems to point at the structural and systematic challenges that are being faced by Eskom, and therefore talking to the issues of policy review, as well as noting that I think that must be shared by the shareholder or borne by the shareholder as cost and not necessarily be lumped to the customers. I take it that the NERSA management team will consider the issue of performance-based regulation that you raised, and that Eskom will respond to the questions indirectly raised to it by your presentation. On slide 8, you talk of the RCA needing to be scrapped, but what if RCA were to be in favor of the customer? Because if you look at it, the way the methodology is that if you've got a fixed asset base and then you are pushing a lot of sales, then you then have a reduction. And therefore, one would say that in the beginning, if you properly, forecast the sales, you then have a higher tariff, and therefore you then most likely go and have a RCA that are in favor of the customer. Why propose the scrapping altogether? Also, you will then have a situation where the issue here is about the regulatory asset base that has already been raised, as in a situation where we've got the regulatory asset base going up, but the volumes going down. Definitely then you're having a situation where even your return will not be able to help you. So I'd just like you to respond on that. And then there's this slide 17, where I just want to ask on bullet 1 of slide 17, are you proposing that there be indicative tariffs for a particular new project that Eskom seeks to embark upon prior to it being included in the asset base? And then on slide 25, on the issue of where you are looking at the debt spiral, and that the old argument that the electricity is very affordable compared to the rest of the world, that it is not well received. I think from my side, it's not a question of whether we receive it well or not, but it's a question of us being factual on it. So would you oblige where we're saying that maybe the same would apply also to Eskom itself, to say, should we have a comparative table to put this argument to rest and see where we stand? Because I think that is important for the public, or even the general public, to know where we stand with respect to the cost of electricity in the country. And then the other thing is, maybe lastly from my side, is when it comes to you having any information that will talk to what you may deem to be the optimal tariff, because one would take it that you will reach a situation where the tariff, irrespective of whether you increase it, it will not be able to compensate for the loss in volume to the extent that it will actually be, exacerbating the situation, pushing us into a debt spiral. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Mr. Fuli, are you fine? Do you have any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Smand.
Chair, maybe one or two questions. Thank you, Mr. Ngidi. So, with respect to the RCA, you've come out clearly to say you don't support the application. However, you've sort of stated that it's more of an emotional decision, and what Eskom would as indicated previously, is that, look, they are simply applying the methodology as is, and which then requires us to, at a particular point in time, look back and see whether certain assumptions have materialized or not, and make those adjustments. So I think it's important for you as an organization to probably firm up that argument or that rejection, because we are operating in a very legislated environment, and it would be difficult for us to take your argument purely based on emotion. I think you need to assist us as the regulator to, if you were to consider your rejection, the basis thereof needs to be really firmed up a bit. So so there's a point that Eskom is making also in the application, and this is with respect to municipal debt, which is increasing over the duration of the MIPD 4 application, and you're not saying anything around that. So I would have expected you to probably comment around the issues of municipal debt. What is it that as an organization you are doing? And as the CEO has indicated, I think they need all the help that they can get, and I think that's one part where you as an organization probably should be giving us an indication of what your views are with respect to this ballooning municipal debt. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spanda. Mr. Modise.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Ngidi. I think, like you, I would like to know answers to the questions that you asked in your presentation. So perhaps, with indulgence, Madam Chair, at some point Eskom can provide some of those answers so that we understand where things are. But, the one thing, though, that the message that I seems to be getting from your presentation, it appears to me almost like frustration with Eskom as your major supplier. And, you mentioned a few things, industry structure no longer working. SALGA is supporting municipalities who are trying to get off-grid power, solar voltaic, and that sort of thing. But also the issue of, customers not paying municipalities, and then municipalities not paying Eskom. The question that I just need to understand, though, is in your engagement with Eskom, is there no understanding from Eskom or appreciation of you as a major customer? And I'll give an example. You're saying you're projecting decline of 2% in your electricity volumes, yet Eskom is ignoring that. And what's the point of consulting if your views are not taken into account? And do you find that, is it for that reason that you find that Eskom is overstating the sales? Is there other methodologies that can be used? Should there be strengthening in maybe rules to ensure that Eskom does take your views into account, as opposed to to just meeting for the sake of meeting, and your views being ignored? So I think that's the first question. What's the point of the consultation? But maybe something that's allied to that. And I know you mentioned it in relation to the RCA. Do you think there's a problem with, I think, the regulatory regime in South Africa? I know you mentioned that perhaps we need to relook at other alternative performance-based regulation and that, and maybe we can engage a little bit more. Why is it that there are no market signals? Why is it that, in your mind, that I know in your slide you said the RCA is dominated by sales, and you don't support the RCA, but it appears that somehow our methodology doesn't allow Eskom to obtain market signal to say revenue or demand has dropped, reduce costs. Remember, all they claim that arises out of lower sales. All Eskom is saying is we spend the money. We're maintaining capacity, we're maintaining costs on the basis of what we thought the sales were going to be. Now sales have dropped. We're still keeping those costs, so customers, you pay. It's your burden to carry. If there's something in the manner in which we're regulating that's not providing the appropriate market signal to an important operator, and how do we know that, and how do you think we should give that market signal to Eskom, say, in the new MIPD 4 application? How should we be getting, say, Eskom to say, please act very soon as you understand that customers are going off grid or your sales is dropping. Don't keep your costs as they are and expect either higher RCA or higher tariff. How do you, in terms of solution, how do you think we should deal with this? And then the next issue is, I think most of this will be covered in the questions that you are asking. Why is that Eskom is ignoring the questions that you're raising? And maybe let's leave it at that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Modise. Mr. Ngidi, you've got 5 minutes to get straight to the questions.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think I'm going to start at the back, those questions that are still fresh in my mind. Just to emphasize on market signals, maybe it's not 100% true that there are no signals, because the previous year, Eskom does experience some signals on the sales, but still project more, which is something we don't understand. We really don't comprehend that, because there are those kind of signals that show you that this is what's happening in the market. You know what's happening in the industry. You know what's happening in your sales in certain customer categories that you have. And once you get those realities, you should try very hard to actually align, because it's the next or the closest reality you have. But we still get more forecasting. That doesn't talk to the reality.
What is the problem with what is the problem? I think also the question relates to the problem that is, or challenge that is there perhaps in the methodologies, or maybe not the methodology, but maybe the understanding, or is it the understanding of Eskom that if they come to NERSA and say, we will achieve X amount of sales, and for us to achieve X amount of sales, we will have to have the energy availability at 80%, and we'll have to produce X amount, right? So is it the understanding of Eskom that simply because they've put it right up there, and therefore they are entitled to it without accountability as to their performance? Because if you are given a revenue, it's an allowed revenue. You are given the right to earn it, not to be entitled to the revenue that is there. So is it a question of maybe flawed methodology, or is it an issue of an understanding from Eskom to say, well, we are entitled to it, so that is why we'll always focus at a higher level, so that when we come back we say we didn't achieve the X amount, there's a gap, and therefore we must get it. Is that the issue here?
Yeah, I think my answer would be in twofold. I think, one, maybe we need more flexibility in the methodology to take cognizance of the realities. But two, also, I think exactly what you said, for us, which is why I'm going back to Mr. Sibanda's question around emotional position, because we've been talking about the issues around, incorrect forecasting for the past 4 or 5 years, but it still remains. And, for us, it's that, getting to that point where we think maybe just Eskom is just being a little bit,
I don't know if it's the right word if I say naughty or something, but I think that's what is coming in my mind, because, we know the reality, the signals are there, as much as they might not be as close to reality as possible, but there is that little bit of a signal in the previous year of how you did with your sales. You can't be projecting more when you know what happened in the previous year. The previous year is not a very long time, Chairperson. I think there's a little bit of both that we need to look at. More flexibility in the methodology to look at realities and adjust, and then maybe for Eskom to be, held more accountable about this, incorrect forecast. Because, I've been with SALGA for over 4 years. Every time I come here, I always complain about incorrect forecasting. There's something wrong there.
Do you think that, is there anything that needs to be done in the methodology to make it even much clearer to Eskom that if we said you are going to get X amount of revenue, that revenue is not guaranteed, it's not yours, you must earn it. So if you haven't performed to achieve that revenue, don't think that that's what you will get or you are entitled to it. Is there something that is not clear in the methodology that needs to be clarified to Eskom so that these overstated assumptions can then be resolved or addressed?
Thank you, Chairperson. I think I won't have a specific answer, but I would say that as SALGA and municipalities would be happy to work with NERSA to look at that. Because hence we're actually suggesting a performance-based regulation maybe to be more entrenched in the methodology itself. But we don't have specifics at this point. But we are happy to work with the industry, Eskom and NERSA, to have a look if it's something that is considered in terms of that performance-based regulation. Okay, I'm going to go to the arguments on the cost of electricity. I think we discussed that with Eskom even in our workshop. And our argument is always, when you say electricity maybe in Kenya is much more expensive than in South Africa, what we always ask Eskom is look at the access levels. The access levels of electricity in South Africa is 90%. And on that 90%, you have different categories of customers in terms of their income levels. But in Kenya, you don't have a choice. If you can't afford electricity, you won't have it. Hence, their access levels is at 20% or less. So our government policy also is different to other government policies like you have in Kenya. They will remain in that 20% access for a long time because they are striving to actually be up there with the prices of electricity. And there's less access. And this is why in our argument we say 90% access means you'll have more different income levels within your customers. And that will mean there is a lot of cross-subsidization that happens. But in other countries, you don't find those cross-subsidization that you'll find in South Africa because of the higher access of electricity, which is a government policy. There was a question around any information that may assist to have optimal tariff to look at the debt spiral. I think a year ago I did present that SALGA was commissioning a study on the impact assessment of MIPD3. Obviously, it's talking to MIPD3 and its RCAs, and that study is actually being finalized. We are going through a final assessment of the report from the consultant, and I think once we have that, we'll be able to share with the regulator some of the recommendations and the findings that we have there. There are policy recommendations, there are regulatory framework recommendations, and there are several recommendations around how the methodology should be looked at and what needs to happen in the future, and we are happy to share that with NERSA as we finalize the study. And I think I hear the concern from Mr. Sibanda, the regulator member, that we must firm up the rejection. And I think this is why I said it up front that there's no how we can be technical about the issue of sales, because it's always our painful point between the discussions between us and Eskom. And I know at this point in time, we know that in the next 2 to 3 years, we're not going to have increases in the sales of electricity. Maybe let's look at, do we still need to have a component of sales in the RCA? Or if we have it, let's have a look at it and how we allow that. You know, that's how I can actually respond to that now. Let's look at the sales, because we know that, you know, in accordance with the sales or with regards to sales, the customers in the next 3 to 5 years are not going to have a benefit in the RCA. If anyone differs, they can tell me why they think that. In terms of what can we say about the municipal debt, I did allude to the fact that we are working with Eskom and government, because I think government has realized that the issue of debt is now a government problem. It's not just an Eskom problem, it's not a SALGA problem, but we are working, we have task team between Eskom and SALGA and municipalities, where we have identified some of the key issues and key challenges that are taking place in municipalities, some of them being revenue management and collection, issues of metering and prepaid management, and prepaid metering, issues of capacity building in municipalities, providing capacity in municipalities to be able to respond to, the operational requirements of their departments. So we are working together with Eskom and government to look and address all the issues that we've identified as key challenges that are a cause to the debt issue. But, it's not just that. There is an issue around the citizens of the country, changing their mindsets around paying for services rendered, because that's the problem we have also. There are cases where customers really cannot pay, but we have a lot of customers also that can pay but do not, because of maybe the mindsets that we created. I'm not sure if it's that, but we have done some audits in municipalities where we found customers like SPAR, they have breached the meter. And what kind of an attitude is that from a customer? We've gone through industries, small industrial customers that have breached meters or have middled or fiddled with the meter to actually run slower. So this is actually why I'm saying it's not just the customers that cannot afford that are stealing electricity. It's just that sickness that we have currently in the country around.
Mr. Ngeti, you only have a minute.
Thank you. I'm just checking if there is any other question that I have left out. There was a question around depreciation. My apologies, Chairperson, I forgot what was it about.
Can you please provide some of the questions in writing, further clarity in writing, including the one that was asked by Mr. Sibanda, because you seem to have some more details on it as to how SALGA is tackling the issue of municipal debt. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to break for lunch. I was hoping that I'm going to take Mr. Ted Blom to present before lunch,